Hey, it's Connor. Welcome to the Hoopercast Movie Hour. So I'm not sure what format this review is coming to us in. I don't know if Dustin and I were able to Skype and record this interview together, or if Dustin had to record this interview on his phone and send it to me. Speaking of a completely unknown format for the show today, we're talking about A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic directed by James Mangold and starring, I almost said Timothy Olyphant. I don't know why I said that. What's his name? Timothy Chalamet. Why did I blank on his name? He's like one of the most famous people in the world right now. I don't know. Anyway, A Complete Unknown. Apparently unknown to me as well in my brain because I keep forgetting their names. A bonus episode next week. I'll tell you about in the outro. See ya. Goodbye. What? Ooh, stick around. Okay, Dustin. Well, hi.
What's up?
From your car.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've done one of these.
I know, but we're professionals and we have multiple ways to get the show recorded every week.
Yes, we do.
So
this is just one of them.
That's right. That's right. And every one of them harkens back to what was at some point our only way of doing the show.
That is correct.
I feel like there was a time where this was the only way to do it, and then it was another way, and then we're Renaissance men.
Yes,
that's right.
Life is cyclical.
Yes, and
you will often find yourself where you were.
Yep. You know, I feel that way about these biopics, man. I feel like no matter what happens, there's always another biopic of a person, and it feels like, I mean, wasn't it literally like 15 years ago that there was a Bob Dylan movie, and now there's another Bob Dylan movie?
Yes, this is true.
Although this is probably a more straightforward biopic. That one, I'm Not There, was pretty experimental, if I recall correctly.
It was experimental in that it was a singular narrative of sorts, told in vignettes with different settings, different actors, different feels.
Yeah.
And
to represent the different eras of Bob Dylan's career.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was a thing. And this is another thing. We're here. Yes. We're here this week to talk about A Complete Unknown.
You tramped all the way from Minnesota. Why is that? I wanted to catch a spark.
If you're traveling in the North Country Fair,
I say no one wants to hear what a kid wrote last month.
Well, I like your songs.
Where the winds hit heavy on the borderline.
Who wrote this?
He did.
Remember me. How about that Joan Baez, folks?
Well, she's pretty. Sings pretty. Maybe a little too pretty.
Your songs are like an oil painting at the dentist's office.
You're kind of an asshole, Bob.
If you go with snowflake storm, where the rivers freeze and summer ends.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Yeah, you can be beautiful or you can be ugly, but you can't be plain.
To keep her from the howling winds.
When's the new album out?
Soon. 200 people in that room, and each one wants me to be somebody else. And they should just let me be.
Let you be what?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
I hear Bob is playing electric.
Not on our stage, he isn't.
Oh my God, it's Bob Dylan.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my goddamn life.
Well, this is gonna piss some people off.
You came here with nothing but a guitar. You never talk about your family, your past.
People make up their past, Sylvie. They remember what they want. They forget the rest.
I want to know which side he's on.
I'm not sure they want to hear what I want to play, Johnny.
I want to hear it.
How does it feel?
Turn it down!
Play loud.
Make some noise, BD.
To have you on your own, like a complete unknown.
So I'll give all the intro for this since I've got all the stuff in front of me since you're behind the wheel. All right. So A Complete Unknown is co-written and directed by James Mangold, a man who can't stop making biopics.
Apparently not.
Well, although he can make biopics after he's made an Indiana Jones film.
That's correct.
This is co-written by Jay Cox. It's based on a book called Dylan Goes Electric by, I thought that said Elijah Wood. Elijah Wald.
Okay.
When did Elijah Wood write a Bob Dylan book? In his spare
Bob
time.
They're big.
Yeah, it's like doesn't have enough on his hands just being Frodo Baggins and Sin City movies and stuff. It's like, really into Dylan. Gonna make a Dylan book.
I think I'll do this now.
No, Elijah Wald is a folk guitarist and music journalist. So he wrote a book. And it stars Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan. We've also got Edward Norton in the movie, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro, Boyd Holbrook, Dan Fogler is somehow in this.
Yes.
And okay, so Dustin, this movie is, by the time this episode comes out, which is on the 27th of December, this film will be released in theaters. You, at the time of this recording, have already seen it. And I believe this is the second time in our show's history and possibly your life that you are the first critic on Letterboxd to review a movie.
This is true.
What was the other one? Do you remember?
Inside Out 2.
Oh, okay.
I may have broken the embargo on that one.
Yeah, that's true. But this is twice in 1 year.
Yeah, this one did also have an embargo, but it was one of those things where it was like, social media is welcome, but the review embargo was, whatever the date was. And I was like, well, I'm just going to wait until the review embargo just to be safe.
Yeah. And
still nobody had reviewed it on Letterboxd. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll do this. I guess it's up to me.
Sure.
Save cinema.
Yeah. You see, we're trying. This is our advocacy through the Hoopercast. This is everyone thinks we just sit around and bullshit about movies, but we have like a true, we're like professors at a fake university. We're allowed to stay as long as we're contributing research to our field. And this is what we do, Dustin.
Yes.
I go give a town hall once every 10 years at my local university and you save cinema on Letterboxd.
There you go.
Yep. Okay.
That is true.
So anyways, the point being that Dustin is a sneaky boy and was able to see this movie before all of you and me. So Dustin, please regale me about A Complete Unknown.
Yeah, so the title, A Complete Unknown, is really appropriate here. So it is, of course, the lyrics, part of the lyrics to the song Like a Rolling Stone, but it is also in reference to how sort of unknowable Bob Dylan is. Right? Like Bob Dylan is one of those artists that, like we mentioned before, has a ton of different eras, a ton of different phases, whether it was starting with folk music and sort of like traditional music. And, he just sort of constantly reinvents himself. And part of that is reinventing not just his music, but kind of himself. And so you have these different eras of Bob Dylan. And in this film, Timothy Chalamet and the writers have taken great pains to present Bob in a way that is both truthful while it's truthful while he's being dishonest. So he often tells people like, I grew up in a circus, like I grew up around, the Big Top, right? Like this whole spiel, but none of it's true, or is it? We don't really know. And I think that's sort of the point, is Bob Dylan as a person, and certainly this film's take on him, is a little bit of everything and nothing. He's equal parts fantasy and a real human, but what does the real human behave like, look like, want? We don't really know. So it's an interesting sort of conundrum, and I'm sure difficult for an actor to play a character who needs to keep both the other characters at a distance and the audience at a distance. if we had ever been let in on who Bob Dylan was more than the characters around him, then those characters would be foolish or would appear foolish. We had to be just as fooled as they were in order for the movie to work. And I think that's an interesting approach. And it's a different approach, but sort of similar to the way that I'm Not There approaches him. It's look at all these different things played by different actors. Which one's the real one? All of them and none of them. Right. And so I think it's an interesting case study of, how to create a protagonist who's unreliable in his narration of his own story and how much he's letting the audience in on things. Now, famously, James Mangold also directed Walk the Line.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite movies. I love Walk the Line. This, because of that fact, because the protagonist is less knowable, it's not as emotionally satisfying. Walk the Line has a traditional 3-act structure. It's very much like, the rise, the fall, and the rebirth of Cash's own person, but also his career. And Bob never had those kind of moments. I mean, he had struggles when he went electric where the folk musicians turned against him. But he never had that level of drug abuse, to sobriety, finding religion, finding a love, finding whatever. You never really have that with Bob Dylan. So it's probably less emotionally satisfying. But I did give this 4 stars because I do think it's a good film and I do think it's worth seeing. Chief among the reasons is Timothée Chalamet's performance. He does not do an impression of Bob Dylan, but you do buy that he's Bob Dylan. It would have been really easy for him to come out and start going, "Hey, everybody, I'm Bob Dylan." And, that whole thing. And there's certainly a little bit of that, in the performance, he's trying to capture Dylan's voice, but it's in the same way that Joaquin tried to capture Johnny's voice. It's not real. It doesn't feel like they're doing an impression. It's how can I capture the essence of it without going into full blown Dana Carvey impression of this? Right. and same with the music. If you listen to a Johnny Cash song and a Joaquin Phoenix Johnny Cash song side by side, they don't sound anything alike. But in the context of the film, you buy it. And I think that's the same here. I do bring up Johnny Cash and Walk the Line for a few reasons. I think it's interesting. The character, Johnny Cash, plays a kind of a pivotal role in this film. So James Mangold got to revisit that character with a different actor playing that character, which is really strange. And he even performs one of the songs that he captured Joaquin performing in Walk the Line. Yeah. And it's a really strange thing for a director to be able to go back to the well of that same character but with a different actor. Yeah. Boyd Holbrook plays Johnny Cash here. He does a fine job. It's apples and oranges, can't be compared to Joaquin. Maybe people will try. I don't know. For me, he plays a pivotal role, but he is still a supporting character with limited screen time in this. You're not going to be able to really compare that to what Joaquin did. But in his time as Johnny Cash, he's effective. And that is the case for all of the actors in this film. Elle Fanning, Edward Norton. You feel for these characters. You do know enough about them to, understand their motivations to some degree, with the exception of Bob Dylan, who does remain a mystery. But you follow these characters that are well-rendered, 3-dimensional people that interact with Bob, and that heightens that sense of who is Bob if all of these people seem real? And so it's a smart move there, and the actors do bring that to life really well. I enjoyed the music. Of course, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. I think, like I said, Timothée Chalamet does a good job with the music, and doesn't betray what was to put his own spin on it, but he also doesn't go into full-blown imitation. I enjoyed the cinematography. I think it's an effective story all around. even if it's maybe a little more emotionally distanced than say Walk the Line. So I think it depends on what you really want out of this film. If you want a straight up biopic, that is what this is. But what kind of a biopic do you want? Do you want one that captures the essence of the artist, or do you want one that's Hollywood glamour? Because this is not Hollywood glamour. You're not going to see Bob break down and have a low point in the film structure from which he has to ascend. That doesn't happen. Timothy plays him well, but there's not much of an arc for Bob here.
Right.
Bob is Bob, and he becomes more Bob as time goes on. As his fame rises, he becomes more entrenched in, well, then I'm going to do me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so he's not changing. He's just like putting his heels down, right? This is me.
So is it like a flat arc then? Like it's more about how Bob's staying true to himself changed the music industry, or is it?
Yes, he did stay true to himself and lost a lot of fans only to try to regain them.
Mm-hmm.
He stayed true to himself. I think it is left up to interpretation whether that was right or wrong, whether that was selfish or whether it was, allowable. And I think that's kind of right on, right? Like we develop a fixation with our, celebrity idols. We want them to be who we want them to be. And when they reinvent themselves, oftentimes we have a hard time adjusting to that reinvention.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't understand that sometimes that reinvention is motivated in making the audience or the listeners more clued in onto who I am. Let me be more me. Sometimes it's, I don't like what the record company made me be. I don't like what, I've become. So I need to redo, like in the case of Johnny Cash, like I lost myself. Let me refine myself. And so Bob Dylan is one of those guys that never had that huge moment, but he does stay true to who he is and what he believes. And he's willing to let people turn on him. So the idea, I think, is Bob is Bob. We're going to watch the people react to him and watch antagonists rise against him and people turn on him. But he's not going to change, and he's not going to give in, and he's not going to say, well, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm going too far.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what this movie is. He's going to say, hey, man, you don't like it. Get out of the way.
Listen to something else.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I'm doing. And so it's interesting. And it is interesting to see an artist go from like, nobody's listening to me and I am doing what I want to do, but I'm still kind of allowing myself to be told what to do, to eventually get to the point where I'm just going to be me. And there's not a big monologue where he's like, hey, I tried to do what you wanted me to do and I'm just going to be Bob Dylan.
Right.
There's none of that. It's literally all internal. Very rarely does the script call for Bob to externalize any of his, thoughts, any of his dreams, any of his intentions. But it's just to watch a person who, even though you don't know him, you kind of feel like I understand why he would do some of what he's doing. I understand it in the, like, he wants to write what makes him happy or rather what interests him. It has nothing to do with his happiness. It has everything to do with, like, these songs come to me. I'm going to make them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whatever you think about that, I don't care. And, and so, yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting way to approach that. And like, obviously they do the biopic thing where it's like, oh, here's an idea for a song,
mm-hmm.
but it's not presented in the way that you would expect. That's like that cheesy way where somebody comes up and says like, hey, Bob, you're like a Rolling Stone. And he's like, the Rolling Stone, hey, that's a good idea for a song, man. And like, there's none of that.
Yeah.
It's just literally like most of the time, a character will like find lyrics and then be like, hey, these are really good. And he's like, okay, whatever. And so we're not in on how do they come to him. We're in on, like, we as the audience get clued in when they're already mostly fully formed. And so there's a moment in the film where he's with a woman, and they wake up in the morning, and she wakes up first, so she kind of wanders around the apartment and finds some lyrics, and she wakes him up, and they talk for a minute, but like all the while, like he's been up for 2.5 minutes, but he's like, okay, I got to go find my guitar. And so he just goes, finds his guitar and starts, playing whatever. And she finds the lyrics and she's like, hey, play this. And so he's like, okay. And so he plays the song, and it's a new song. No one's heard it before, but we're not clued in on like, why did you write this, Bob? Like, this is really good. What's it about? There's none of that. What inspired this? It's literally just, here's the song. It exists now. You're welcome. And I don't know, it's interesting that the screenplay takes every opportunity to just let Bob be Bob and let us experience him in the way that everyone else did. Don't know where this came from. Don't know why, but it's here and it's great. And so I enjoyed the movie for that reason. It, stayed true to what it was. Again, don't go in expecting Walk the Line. It's not a romantic film. It's not a love story. It's not about rising from the ashes. It's just about a man with immense talent that we really don't know much about.
And that's one of those things where I just wonder, like, would I prefer the book of this just because since it is so internal, is it more enjoyable to digest the information in a more like straightforward journalistic way? Is it something that I would, enjoy seeing played out narratively by actors?
Right.
And I guess I'm torn in that sense. It's nuts because like part of me, when I heard that Johnny Cash was in the movie, part of me really did want him to just bring back Joaquin Phoenix and just
I think that would have been cool.
Have a mangled verse of like folk singers.
Cinematic universe.
Yeah. Who's next? It's John F. Kennedy.
Sure.
So, but I can see how a lot of people would have been like, that's stupid, but I don't know. It would have been fun.
I think it would have been fun. I think, good luck trying to get Joaquin to do that. And I don't know. I haven't heard. Maybe they asked him.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
It's very possible. But yeah, Boyd Holbrook does a good job, but it's a very different performance.
Yeah.
He plays a Johnny Cash that, we're not clued in on all the intricacies of Johnny's life here.
Right.
So he plays where he's interacting with Bob. It is like Bob's perception of him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so his perception of him is this like slightly drunk cowboy. And so that's the Johnny Cash we get in this.
Yeah.
It's not the struggling, traumatized Johnny that Joaquin brings. This is just the cowboy. And so it's an interesting, but it's different, but it's an inherently different approach.
It's so crazy how movies do that, man. Like it just, depending on who's the protagonist, there's a much different interpretation of their mood and their demeanor and what's driving them. And when they're a side character, it's allowed to be more kind of broad and just sort of, fly on the wall type of thing where, there's no insight into like what day of the week it is and, like whether or not he's hungry, you know what I mean? Like just little things like that.
It's different. And it's because the perception is limited to just this film, right? Like in Walk the Line, we saw Joaquin put on a swagger, right? Like a false confidence that he takes on stage with him. Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. But the scene before was him downing pills in the dressing room and like staring at himself in the mirror and just looking at what, shell of a man he's become. And so we see that context and we're like, oh, Johnny is broken and now he's going to go put on an act.
Yeah.
But in this film, because we don't see that moment in the dressing room, all we see is the swagger.
Yeah.
And it makes him feel mythic.
Yeah. It's Johnny Cash, the idea.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Here's what I'd say to you. I think that you would enjoy this film. I don't know how deep your knowledge of Bob Dylan goes, but I think you would enjoy the film if only to see how Mangold approaches a very different type of biopic.
Yeah.
Visually, maybe cinematically, they appear similar.
Yeah.
But they are different. And I do think you would get something out of that.
Have you ever seen Dylan in concert? I've
seen footage of him in concert. I have not been to a concert.
This is the weird thing, because I've told this story before on the show, but I know far less about Bob Dylan than you do, but I have seen him live in concert.
Oh, nice, cool.
Yeah, I saw him in 2008 or 9. And he came down to the Wharf with John Mellencamp and Willie Nelson, and yes. And I wasn't like a fan. I was just there. I was there with a friend who had tickets, and I was like, sure, we'll go to the Wharf. And I didn't like it. He was playing mostly his whatever was on his new record at the time. And I think already my friend was like, yeah, people are so on this. And I didn't like it. And people were like leaving while he was on stage. Yeah. And it was in the paper the next day that like people left during Dylan's set. And it always kind of struck me because like within the context of him being like a true artist, true to himself, he probably didn't care.
He probably kind of got a little bit of a thrill at that.
Yeah. Like, oh, good. He's like an energy vampire. He's like, yes.
I'm doing something right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm turning people off. Good. I love this. But I've never really been a fan of his music in general. I've always thought him enigmatic as an artist and respected him as an artist. But I'm one of those people who's like, hey, do what you want to do. It's just not my thing.
Sure.
But it's interesting that he has like this kind of like Dylan's popularity is not so much today as it was, in decades past before he went electric, because he's, like you said, he's a complete unknown. He's this artist. No one's really listening to him. And then he's kind of on that upswing, and he's in that sweet spot of he's on the rise, but he's true to himself. And then the ride, such as it has become, is over when he goes electric and turns off a big portion of his fan base, but he still decides like, that's the way I'm going to go. And I'm cool with like the listenership dropping off.
Yes.
And it's interesting to see someone just kind of just go through a lot. I've always been jealous of those people who can do that, because I'd be so worried about making money and maintaining income that I would make whatever compromise was necessary to please my audience. I would completely sell my authenticity. I don't know how fun to watch that is for me, because I'm such a simp for the 3-act structure. But I mean, I looked in the trailer, and I mean, I thought Timothée Chalamet looked great. I think I love his take on Dylan, and I agree. It's weird because you say like it's not like a caricature or an impression, but it's such a good embodiment of him that it's like it reads to my brain as like a very good mimic of him. But there is something like you really have to do, like when you do, we talked about this on the show before too. When you do voices, when you do impressions, you can't just say a catchphrase as Kermit the Frog. You need to be able to say anything as Kermit the Frog. So you can't just hit a preferred octave and say a key amount of phrases. You have to be able to like, I get why people go method for these kind of roles, because you need to be able to just read the phone book as this character and talk about what's on TV. And for it to sound natural and not like an impression, but you just fall into a pattern of speech and like a vocal tone more than you do like, hey, you're just you're just talking in like the voice, but not so much throwing out a cartoonish impression.
Correct.
Yeah, that must be difficult.
It would have to be, and I'm sure there's a lot of like coaching that goes along with that to be like, look, maybe Chalamet came in with something more broad and they tweaked it, or maybe he came in with something that was like, I'm not going to go there, and they're like, you got to go a little bit more. I don't know.
It feels like it's hard enough to do vocally. Like that's one thing. Like vocally is hard enough. Now do it without contorting your face, and do it while you're acting with your face like a regular person. Like that's hard. That's tough.
It's tough. And he does it really well here. And I believe he's playing the guitar, and he does a great job, mimicking, Dylan's style. And it's obviously coached, right? Like Chalamet obviously worked on this for a long time before he ever stepped on that set.
This says here that he was he stayed immersed in Dylan on set. Like they called him Bob. He was called Bob Dylan on the call sheet, and I wonder if it was it like we say, like I think there's two sides of method acting. Like one of it is like the insufferable, like, okay, come on, dude. Like the ego part of it. It gets made fun of a lot, but there is another part of it that's like, look, if I'm going to do this, I do kind of have to like stay.
I have to do it.
I have to talk. And for me to not feel ridiculous acting like Bob Dylan all the time, I need you just to go ahead and call me Bob, if you wouldn't mind. Like, it's not so much like, don't call me Timothy. My name's not Timothy. I won't answer to Timothy. I'm sure he did, but like, but just like we say, like when you're doing that much of a character, it sort of requires that if it's going to be easier on you, unless you want to hold up shooting for 3 hours while you psych yourself up,
Right. Exactly.
What's less disruptive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it shows the work that he put in and the effort. And yeah, I mean, I totally buy him as Bob Dylan, and it's a mixture of his performance and the writing, but it's there. And so, kudos to him for that. And yeah, man, I think it's a really it's just a really solid film. And I do recommend it.
One more note about the music, by the way. The producer said that Chalamet sings 40 Dylan songs in the film, and he does play the guitars and harmonicas. It says all performances were recorded live while filming. Chalamet, Barbaro, Norton, and Holbrook sang and played their own instruments. And the sound engineer said the recording was done with period appropriate microphones and instruments and without the use of earpieces.
Oh, nice.
So they were doing it old school.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that is impressive. And, and I could tell they were recording it to sound period appropriate. I didn't know what that meant, or, how they accomplished it, but it does make sense. It does not sound like a modern microphone, with a Bob Dylan impressionist on it.
Right.
It sounds like period appropriate. And so, yeah, that's interesting. And I think, it's not spoiling anything. It's based on a book, Dylan Goes Electric. Like that is sort of the central crux here is Bob eventually progresses to a point where, he's interested in more than just folk music. That was maybe his first, love maybe, but it's not where he wanted to stay.
Yeah.
He was listening to everything and influenced by so many things that, of course, eventually he's going to be like, well, look, I want to go in this other direction. And the problem was, and the reason maybe one of the reasons why Dylan Going Electric was as big as it was, is because he did like folk festivals where people are expecting folk music, and he plays his electric stuff and just turns everybody off. And he doesn't care, right? Like it doesn't really matter to me that you're mad about this. And it reminds me of, Bob Dylan's eras, right? Again, after he goes electric, not too many years later, he's just like, okay, well, now I'm a Christian artist and I'm going to make Christian music.
Yeah.
and everyone gets mad about it. And then they finally get on board after 2 or 3 albums. And he's like, I'm not doing that anymore. And everyone's like, what? And so like, it's a whole thing.
I love that so much.
He's just like, I'm not going to do that.
I love that so much.
we talk about art, and it's really easy to make art for people. It's really easy to make art for corporations.
Yeah.
It's harder to just make art for you. And it does, to some degree, feel like Bob Dylan was able to make art for him. Like he, in these stories and these, these songs, he's telling something. I don't know what it is. Maybe he doesn't know what it is, but he is telling something. And I think that he was not of the ilk that would say like, well, let me just do what the record company says, or let me just do what the audience wants, right? Like give them what they want. They're here at a folk festival. Let me play them folk music. No, I'm going to play them my music, what I'm interested in right now. And if they don't like it, then they can leave. I don't care. And there is a bravery to that. And some would say selfishness, and some would say, well, he's a jerk. I'm of the mindset that's like, look, I guess if I paid $80 to see Bob Dylan and he just decided to bust out, a random 8 tracks that I've never heard because he's never played them live before to anybody. Maybe I would be like, well, can't you play something I know?
Yeah.
Sure. I can understand that, but I can also understand as an artist, like, I don't want to do that. All these artists, like Paul McCartney's of his generation, and Paul McCartney's still out there playing those same Beatles tracks to live audiences year after year after year. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I can totally see how somebody would say, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go out and sing Blowing in the Wind again. I've done that.
I'm about to blow away in the wind.
Buy the LP. Right. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
So I completely understand that. And, there's artists like Bob Dylan, who maybe they will play some of the older stuff that you're there for, but play it in a new way, right? Like Jack White does that all the time. You want to hear Seven Nation Army? Cool. Well, this is my new version of it. And you're like, oh, okay, great. But Bob is like, well, I'm not going to play anything that you want because I don't want to play those things. If I wanted to, then I would, but I don't want to, so I'm not. And so I could maybe see how some people would look at this film and say, it's an unflattering portrait of Bob Dylan. It's an uncompromising portrait of Bob Dylan. Maybe so. But maybe that's who Bob Dylan is. Like maybe the point of Bob Dylan is I'm an unknown because you don't know what I'm going to do next, because I'm going to do what I want to do next. And you're not me, so you don't know what it's going to be. And I'm not going to tell you. And I'm not going to say, hey guys, I'm into electric stuff now. I'm just going to bust out an electric album and say, here you go. I don't know. There is something cool about that mentality, and it's reflected here. And yeah, I enjoyed it. And obviously we know from history, like so many songwriters have been inspired by Bob Dylan. It is cool to see him in this movie, cool as a cucumber, but still kind of fanboying out over Johnny Cash, right? Like to see who he and Woody Guthrie, like who did you idolize?
Yeah.
And what's making you make the music? What are your influences? And it's cool because Johnny Cash would be like, yeah, man, I love Bob Dylan. I'm inspired by him all the time. And meanwhile, Bob Dylan's like, oh, I love Johnny Cash. I'm inspired by him all the time. And they're contemporaries. I mean, one's older than the other, but they're making music at the same time and they're inspiring one another. It's a cool thing. And so it is kind of cool to watch him interact with these other artists. Joan Baez, right? Yes, he's inspired by her. She's inspired by him. Bob, it's easy to portray the mythic Bob that everyone's just like, oh, he's a genius from day one. And they do that here. But it also does take pains to be like, but Bob's also inspired by things that his contemporaries were doing. Whatever Joan was up to, whatever Johnny was up to, like he's filtering all of that through himself. And he's hearing it and going, cool, I'm going to do something that's a little bit cashish today and whatever. It's still me. And so anyway, long-winded way of saying I approve of the movie. It's a good movie. It's worth your time. Should you go see it in theaters? I think if you're a Bob Dylan fan, yes. I think if you're into biopics, sure. If you, I suppose if you're more of the mind that's like, well, I want something with like a clear 3-act. I want something that's more of a traditional, it fits in a box kind of story. It's about someone who's struggling with addiction, or somebody who's struggling to find love, or somebody who's whatever, coming to grips with fame and success. If that's what you want, you're not going to get that here. But maybe that's okay too. So I would if you can't reconcile that, then sit back, maybe see it on streaming or not at all. If you think like, hey, maybe I should be tested in this way, like, then go see it. Like, see how if it's presented well, and it is presented well here, see how you react to it. You may be like me and you're like, hey, look, it's not great, but it's good. And you may also go, nope, it's what I thought. I don't want to see it. But all that to say, I gave it 4 stars. If you're anything like me, you'll at least be glad you saw it.
You know, I think of people like my friend Ian, who knows a lot about Dylan, but is critical of, he's one of those people who is, I feel like you can be too much of a Dylan fan and be set up for failure seeing a Hollywood film about Bob Dylan, because forget structure, like just people in general get upset when things are missed or they feel like things aren't presented the right way. And so I think that there is a danger in, like, if Bob Dylan's like one of your favorite artists, there might be, it's like go in with an open mind, because you may be a fan of much of what the film presents, but you may still find fault with this or that not being presented. And that's just the limitations of a film and of narrative storytelling. When you mentioned him ditching Christian music once he'd amassed an audience, my first thought visually was that scene in Forrest Gump where he's running across the desert and all those people are with him, and then he just stops and he turns around and he's like, I'm pretty tired now, I think I'm gonna go home. And everyone's like, what are we supposed to do? I'm just picturing Bob Dylan be like, well, I think I'm sick of singing about Jesus, I think I'm gonna go home now. And his fans are like, what?
Exactly.
Why? What are we supposed to do?
I'm going to go form a supergroup. Be a traveling Wilbury now.
Yeah. I think I'm just going to go stare at the ocean for a couple months. What?
Yeah. My favorite Bob Dylan story was, I think it happened like while we were in college. I don't know if you remember this. And it may, for some reason, my brain tells me it was in Mobile, but I could be wrong. Wherever he was like, 3 a.m, and he was wandering around just kind of like exploring the city, and the cops picked him up and talked to him and thought he was drunk and like threw him, in the trunk tank. And you come to find out it was just Bob Dylan being Bob Dylan, but he never said like, oh no, I'm Bob Dylan, man. Like, don't do this. Like, he just was like, okay, I'll get in the car. And they put him in the car, drive him to jail, throw him in the cell, and he's like, okay, I'm here now. And I just love the image of like Bob Dylan just walking with no purpose.
Yeah.
A cop, like, I imagine it
harassing him,
like with a lot of cuts, like a cop grabs him by the shoulders, like grabs his shirt, and you just see like a close on Bob as the cop grabs the shirt, throws him in the back of the car. He lands in the back of the car, like push him back out of the car into the jail cell, and Bob's just like center frame, just like, okay, this is happening to me now.
Whatever.
Not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And then eventually like, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Dylan. Sorry about that. And he's like, okay, I guess I'll go home.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'll go back to the hotel. And I just love that mentality. He's just like, I don't care. I'm just along for the ride. Whatever.
There's I read an interview one time with Robert Downey Jr., and this is somewhere in the, maybe the phase 1 Marvel time. Like, he was Iron Man, but it was before like big money Captain America Civil War Downey. he was talking about taking notes from directors, like how do you take how well do you take direction? And he was like, especially with less experienced directors, or how do you take direction when you like an experienced acclaimed actor actually know what you're doing more than the director does, which is, a leading question. It assumes the director doesn't have a vision, but I think that sometimes it probably is readily apparent on set. And
sure,
like you don't have a vision, you just have an opinion about what I'm doing, but it has nothing to do with the overall whatever. And they were like, how do you deal with that? And he says, you just smile, nod, say okay, and then just do whatever the fuck you were about to do anyways. and that's what
exactly.
And that stuck with me because I thought like, well, that's ballsy, but I also thought like, yeah, that's what you do. You don't really argue, you just kind of say, oh, okay, and you just don't do it. You just don't take the note. And I've taken that piece of advice into my life more than I thought I would. But there's been many times where it's just like, I don't have to argue this right now. I just have to keep doing what I'm doing later. And it feels in the moment like you're being misleading, or it's like, but you don't come out and say, oh, I will do that. You just say, oh, I got it. I see what you mean. And they think you mean I'm going to do it. And you just say, no, I understand.
I can relate to that a little bit. In my job, it's not uncommon for somebody to be like, hey, can we get less reverb on that vocal mic? I'm like, yeah, sure, but I know it needs reverb, so I'm like, I'm going to start sneaking it down slowly. You tell me where you want it, but I don't actually do anything. And I just wait a second, and they go, yeah, that sounds good. That's like, great.
That's the best thing ever. The placebo effect. They want to feel like you listened to them.
Yes.
They don't want to. They may not notice you actually didn't listen to them, but they do not want you to refuse their request to their face.
Correct.
And, and if they're smart enough, they'll come back and be like, hey man, it doesn't sound any different. Are you touching the knob? And you might go, oh, okay, sorry. I'll actually do it now. And you just, like you can't really tell. Sometimes they just don't notice. And if they don't notice, then you shouldn't have made the change anyway. And it's good that you don't, So Dylan makes me think of that because that feels like the kind of guy he is. Like, hey, you shouldn't go electric. Oh, cool. I understand what you're saying. And then just the next day he's got an electric guitar and they're like, oh, well, I guess we're going electric now.
Don't you remember what we talked about yesterday?
Yeah. No, I heard you. I understood. I just disagreed. I'm going to do my own thing.
I just think you're an idiot.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to fire me? Okay. That's cool. I'll just go walk the streets of Mobile.
Right.
Well, that's cool, man. This is probably no doubt going to be up for some awards. It's one of those
I think so.
award season biopics, Christmas Day release. It's almost predestined. So
yes.
Well, good. Well, good luck to them. And so if you're listening to this and you made it this far, so we actually don't know the box office for this because it hasn't come out yet. So I guess maybe we'll touch base on that some other time or not. I don't know. Look it up yourself.
We shall see.
Go Google it. Why do we have to do everything for you?
I'll tell you, it is going to be an interesting thing though, because it's an R-rated biopic.
Ooh.
So it's not like Walk the Line, which of course is going to draw in, families, dates, whatever else. This is an R-rated film, so we'll see what happens.
Well, the budget's $80 million, so they better make that money back.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
It's but we'll see if people want to go see an R-rated biopic on Christmas.
About Bob Dylan.
About Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Real cheer, really get you in the Christmas spirit.
That's right.
What is this even opening against? What else is coming out on Christmas? Like Nosferatu?
Yeah, maybe.
I guess that is kind of a toss-up, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'd think like, oh yeah, it's going against Chronicles of Narnia. It's going to get clobbered, but it's like, it's between this and Nosferatu, which is an R-rated horror film remake about a vampire. So
right.
That's got a whole history to it, by the way, too. I don't know what you know about the history of Nosferatu, but like that film was almost lost to history. Like it was like ordered destroyed or something, and like a few people like kept copies, and so that's how it survived and became one of the most influential movies of all time. But like it almost got buried and erased from history. So and now it's up against a Bob Dylan biopic.
I know Right. I know Nosferatu was famously referenced on SpongeBob. Like they played a clip from the film, an edited clip from the film on SpongeBob. And I saw an article the other day. I didn't read it. There's like the headline was Robert Eggers credits SpongeBob SquarePants with keeping Nosferatu relevant
in the public consciousness.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that is the first place I ever heard about Nosferatu. You're right.
It's not the first place I heard of.
Would have come out when I was like 11.
Where I first heard of Nosferatu. Well, I didn't realize, but it was Nosferatu. There's an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark where someone is watching Nosferatu in a movie theater, and Nosferatu is like the vampire that comes off the screen and into the theater. So like I didn't know that that's what they're watching, but apparently that they're watching the film Nosferatu. And
somebody at Nickelodeon was loving some Nosferatu, I guess.
I know. And then ironically,
somebody else at Nickelodeon was loving Toes. Nosferatu.
Nosferatos.
Nosferatos.
That sounds like a vampire Mexican restaurant. Come on over to Nosferatos. No garlic.
Some say we have the best margarita.
Yeah. Yeah, this is up against Nosferatu, Better Man, which is not a Pearl Jam biopic. It is that movie about the guy who's a monkey.
Yes.
There's Baby Girl, Los Fricas, and The Fire Inside. I don't know. Complete Unknown might take the cake here.
Of those, yeah, I think it will.
I don't know. That's such an odd Christmas slate. Like the week before,
or will Sonic 3 hold strong?
Sonic 3 is going to hold strong. I'm going to go see that. I want to bury Mufasa. I want to kill him more than Scar killed him.
Yeah, notice I didn't bring up Mufasa. I think I'll make the prediction here. It'll be wrong, and y'all can laugh at me. But I'm predicting that Sonic's going to outperform Mufasa pretty heavily.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally buying 3 tickets for Sonic 3, so I'm doing my part, and I challenge everyone else to do theirs too. Damn it.
Yes, correct.
All right. Well, cool. Okay. Well, that's a complete unknown, and down with Mufasa. All right, everybody. Cheers.
Later.
We're saying goodbye because I can tell Dustin's home.
I am home.
Okay. All right, buddy.
I am home.
Have a good one, man. Right. I'll turn this off and I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good, Doug.
All right,
we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, that's it. That's the show this week. So so what is next week? Oh yeah, so I have an outro for this. I recorded an outro. Anyway, let me toss to that outro. All right, that's the review. Thanks for listening. Like I said in the intro, our next episode is actually early next week. We have a bonus episode on the 31st. It's the Best of 2004 episode, the annual Best of episode from our show. We'll be talking about my favorite films of 2004, my honorable mentions, and I even included some dishonorable mentions in there because some of you guys just love to hear us hate on movies. And that's what we're here to do at the end of that episode. So it's all time coded. So be looking for that. Enjoy it. And we'll see you in the new year, I suppose, after that. Yeah. All right. Well, whatever. Anyways. Okay. Bye.